On a quiet February night in 1564, under the same stars that had guided sailors and mystics for centuries, a boy was born in Pisa, a boy who would one day challenge the very heavens. His name was Galileo Galilei. In a world where the Earth was believed to sit motionless at the center of creation, Galileo dared to look up and ask, what if they're wrong? 400 years ago, a man looked at the sky and exposed one of history's biggest lies. For centuries, the world had been told that Earth was the center of everything, that the heavens revolved around us, perfect and untouchable. Galileo Galilei proved them wrong. With a crude telescope and a relentless mind, he revealed a universe that didn't fit the church's story, and for that, they tried to destroy him. He was dragged before the Inquisition, threatened with torture, and forced to kneel and deny what he knew was true. The Earth moves. But even as they silenced him, Galileo's discoveries couldn't be buried. His work shattered blind faith in authority and started a war between science and power that still echoes today. This isn't just a story about stars and planets. It's about truth versus control, courage versus fear, and one man who risked his life to open our eyes. Are you ready to see why Galileo's fight is still dangerous, even now? This is not just the story of a scientist. It is the story of a man who defied kings and cardinals, who stood at the edge of heresy and whispered to the universe, "I will not be silenced." Chapter 1. The Early Mind of a Genius. In the bustling city of Pisa, on a crisp February morning in 1564, a child was born who would one day change how humanity saw the universe. His name was Galileo Galilei, the son of Vincenzo Galilei, a musician with a sharp intellect, and Giulia Ammannati, a woman known for her quiet strength. From the beginning, Galileo's world was filled with music, numbers, and curiosity. His father, though a talented lute player, was not content to simply follow tradition. He believed in questioning old methods of tuning instruments, and perhaps without knowing it, passed this spirit of questioning down to his son. As a boy, Galileo wasn't particularly different from the children in his neighborhood, or so it seemed. He played in the narrow streets, raced with friends, and marveled at the towering Leaning Tower of Pisa. But there was something unusual about the way he looked at the world. When most children would see a swinging lantern in the cathedral and think nothing of it, Galileo would stare, watching its motion, counting heartbeats to measure its rhythm. At just 17, the simple observation of a church lamp would lead him to the idea of the pendulum, a concept that would later shape clocks and timekeeping forever. Galileo's early education wasn't easy. His father pushed him toward medicine, a respectable and lucrative career, but sitting through long lectures about the humors of the body bored him endlessly. Instead, he found himself drawn to mathematics, a subject that seemed alive, precise, and elegant. Numbers spoke to him in a way that anatomy never could. While his professors taught rigid theories handed down from Aristotle, Galileo's mind wandered. Why should the old philosophers have the final say on how the world works? Why not test their ideas? Why not see for himself? One day, while studying the simple act of rolling balls down a slope, Galileo began to suspect that motion followed its own rules that could be measured, predicted, and proven. This curiosity sparked a fire that would never be extinguished. He started building small experiments with whatever materials he could find, turning ordinary objects into instruments of discovery. By the time Galileo left the University of Pisa, he wasn't just a student. He was a thinker, a challenger of tradition, a man unwilling to accept "because it has always been so" as an answer. The seeds of rebellion and brilliance had been planted, and the world was not ready for the storm he was about to unleash. Chapter 2. Discoveries that shook the world. By the dawn of the 16th century, Galileo had already earned a reputation as a brilliant mind, someone who saw the world differently. But no one, not even Galileo himself, could have predicted how far his curiosity would take him. In 1609, a rumor reached him from Holland. A strange device, no more than a tube with lenses, could make distant objects appear closer. Merchants used it to spot ships long before they reached shore, but Galileo saw something much greater. He locked himself in his workshop, and with nothing but wood, glass, and relentless patience, built a far superior version. What he held in his hands wasn't just a spyglass, it was a key, one that would unlock the secrets of the heavens. When Galileo first pointed his telescope at the night sky, what he saw stunned him. The moon was not the smooth, perfect sphere philosophers had described for centuries. Its surface was rugged, filled with jagged mountains and deep craters, just like Earth. This discovery alone was enough to rattle the foundations of ancient belief. But the moon was only the beginning. In January 1610, Galileo turned his telescope toward Jupiter. Over several nights, he noticed 4 tiny stars near the planet, shifting positions as if dancing in orbit. These were not stars at all. They were moons circling Jupiter in defiance of the long-accepted idea that everything revolved around Earth. For the first time, Galileo had physical proof that our planet was not the center of the universe. He didn't stop there. He sketched sunspots on the blazing surface of the sun, proving that it was not the flawless orb people once believed. He studied Saturn, baffled by the strange-looking ears on its sides, the rings, though he didn't fully understand them yet. He gazed at the Milky Way and discovered that it wasn't a misty cloud, but a sprawling ocean of countless stars. Each observation was like a blow to the old world order, a direct challenge to Aristotle and the Church's centuries-old teachings. Galileo's telescope had become a weapon, one aimed at ignorance and superstition. And though he was proud of his findings, he also knew they would not be welcomed by everyone. When he published The Starry Messenger in 1610, the world erupted. Some hailed him as a visionary, others called him a heretic. But Galileo didn't care. He had seen the truth with his own eyes, and he would not pretend otherwise. The heavens were far more complex, far more beautiful than anyone had imagined, and this was only the beginning of his battle.
Chapter 3: Clash with the Church. By the time Galileo's discoveries spread across Europe, whispers of his defiance reached the very heart of power, the Catholic Church. For centuries, the Church had embraced the geocentric model, which taught that Earth was the center of all creation, fixed and unmoving, with the sun, moon, and stars circling it like clockwork. It wasn't just science, it was theology. To question it was to question the order of God's universe. But Galileo was not a man who bent easily. His telescope had revealed a different story, one that matched the daring theory of Nicholas Copernicus, who claimed that the Earth, far from being the center of all things, moved around the sun. Galileo saw proof of this in the phases of Venus and the moons of Jupiter, evidence that planets could orbit something other than Earth. At first, Galileo tried to present his findings carefully, even dedicating the Starry Messenger to the Medici family, hoping to gain powerful allies. But as his fame grew, so did his critics. Scholars clung to Aristotle's teachings, scoffing at this mad Tuscan and his trickery with glass. Some even refused to look through his telescope, claiming that if what he said was true, God would have made it visible to the naked eye. The Church grew uneasy. In 1616, the Holy Office formally declared the heliocentric theory to be foolish and absurd in philosophy, and formally heretical. Galileo was warned, stop teaching this idea or face punishment. He promised obedience, but deep inside, his fire only burned hotter. Years passed, and a new pope, Urban VIII, ascended the papal throne. Galileo believed he had found a friend in Urban, a man he thought would understand his pursuit of truth. With this hope, he wrote his most famous work, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, a brilliant conversation between 3 characters, one of whom was a thinly veiled mockery of the stubborn geocentric view. The book was daring, witty and devastatingly convincing. But the church did not laugh. They saw the dialogue as a direct insult, not only to their teachings, but to the Pope himself. Urban VIII, once a supporter, now felt betrayed. In 1633, Galileo was summoned to Rome to stand trial for heresy. The stage was set for a clash unlike any in history, a war between faith and reason, between an unshakable institution and one man armed with nothing but the truth he had seen through a telescope. Chapter 4: Trial and House Arrest. In the spring of 1633, Galileo, now an old man of 69, was hauled before the feared Roman Inquisition. The same hands that once sketched the stars now trembled, not from guilt, but from the weight of standing against a force far larger than himself. The marble halls of the Vatican were cold and unforgiving, and the men who sat in judgment were not mere scholars, they were defenders of centuries-old doctrine. The trial was brutal, not in violence, but in pressure. Galileo was interrogated for weeks, his words dissected, his motives questioned. His book, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, was read aloud, and passages were hurled at him as evidence of his defiance. To the inquisitors, Galileo was not just a scientist, he was a dangerous voice whispering rebellion into the ears of the faithful. Galileo's sharp mind, once so confident, now faced a terrifying choice. He could hold firm to the truth that the earth moves around the sun, or he could save his life by renouncing what he knew was real. The church, unshakable in its stance, demanded submission. On June 22, 1633, in a solemn hall filled with candlelight and shadows, Galileo bowed his head. He was forced to kneel and recite the words they placed before him, publicly denying the heliocentric theory he had spent his life proving. The humiliation cut deep, but death by fire was the alternative, and Galileo was no martyr. Yet legend tells us that as he rose, he whispered under his breath, "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves. Whether the story is true or not, the words have echoed across time, a defiant reminder that truth cannot be silenced. Galileo's sentence was not execution, but house arrest. For the rest of his life, he would be confined to his villa near Florence, watched and restricted, a prisoner of his own brilliance. His books were banned, his name blackened, but his mind was far from broken. Even under arrest, Galileo refused to let his pen grow cold. Blindness began to claim his sight in his later years, yet he dictated ideas to students and friends. In 1638, he completed discourses and mathematical demonstrations related to two new sciences, a groundbreaking work that would become the foundation for modern physics and engineering. The man who once gazed at the stars was now trapped within walls, but his thoughts soared higher than any telescope could reach. Chapter 5: Legacy of a Rebel Scientist. When Galileo Galilei died on January 8, 1642, the world did not immediately celebrate him as the father of modern science. He was buried quietly, still under the shadow of the Church's condemnation. Yet history, like the earth he defended, continued to move, and it would turn in Galileo's favor. Galileo's ideas refused to stay buried. His works were smuggled across Europe, studied by brilliant minds who built on his foundations. Isaac Newton, perhaps the greatest scientist who ever lived, once said that he stood on the shoulders of giants. Galileo was one of those giants. His experiments on motion, his mathematical proofs, and his insistence on observation over blind belief changed the course of human thought. The telescope, once seen as simply curiosity, became a tool that reshaped astronomy forever. Because of Galileo's courage to look and question, humanity discovered a universe far larger and stranger than it had ever imagined. His vision broke the chains of dogma and set science on a path that would lead to space exploration, satellites, and our modern understanding of the cosmos. Centuries later, the Catholic Church, once his greatest enemy, admitted its mistake. In 1992, Pope John Paul II formally acknowledged the wrong done to Galileo, praising him as a man of faith and science. It was a vindication that came too late for Galileo himself, but not for the truth he had fought for. Galileo's life is more than a story of discoveries. It is the story of a man who dared to stand alone against the weight of tradition and authority. A man who trusted the evidence of his own eyes, even when the world called him a heretic. His name now stands with the immortals, a symbol of curiosity, courage, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. He was not just an astronomer. He was a rebel, a visionary, a man who looked through a small tube of glass and saw the universe, and refused to look away.